right. Hello and welcome to what is the 22nd Urban Lunch Talk. And this is where we gather research and innovation stakeholders in and around our program, JPI Urban Europe, and the Driving Urban Transitions Partnership. And we tend to gather guests who we think should eat lunch together and somewhat synthesize their evidence-based knowledge. I'm Caroline and I'm hosting this lunch, so I've done a few times now. I mainly work with urban living labs and social innovation at Sweco in Gothenburg, Sweden. I also have with me my colleagues Ida and Katarina from JPI Urban Europe and the DUT partnership, who are backstage and hosting today's chat. I hope you're all having a nice lunch wherever you are. Please let us know in the chat from where you're joining. And I would really like to highlight that we try to kind of format these talks so that you don't have to look at the screen. Perhaps you want to take a walk. It is lunchtime after all. Maybe you just want to look out the window for a little screen break. Feel free. We are going to take the tempo down a little bit during this lunch break. So just enjoy listening in to this talk, or yeah, consider it a live podcast if you wish. However, the chat is alive and well, so feel free to interact and share your ideas, your questions, and so on. Please also note that the webinar will be recorded and it will be published on the JPI Urban Europe YouTube channel and on the event page of this talk where you registered. So you will find the recording and you can share it with colleagues or friends or family, what do I know. The Urban Lunch Talks has a new envisioned future-oriented theme. As many of you know, I see familiar names here participating. The Driving Urban Transitions Partnership has a, towards sustainable future. So we want to really look towards the future here. And it has three kind of pathways or pillars. It's circular urban economies, positive energy districts, and then 15-minute cities, which is very related to what we're talking about today. So how do we imagine the life of citizens in the many European cities of tomorrow in a way that also help us deal with urban dilemmas and to move forward? Today, we more specifically try and envision the future of inclusive and sustainable mobility. So, as usual, we start with a little tour de lunch table. We have with us four exciting guests and excited guests to discuss the past, the present, but not least the future of inclusive urban mobility. Two of you represents projects from the ERANET co-fund Urban Accessibility and Connectivity Call, ENUAC. And I encourage all of you who listen in to go check out the rest of the projects too in this call, who work on this topic. But Maximilian Jäger, I would like to say hello to you first, not least since you're very active in the Driving Urban Transitions Partnership and in JPI Urban Europe's work when it comes to mobility and the 15-minute city concept. You're an expert for mobility innovations at Austria Tech, and you coordinate this 15-minute city transition pathway in the partnership. But let me ask you then, Maxi, I'm under the impression that you believe that we are definitely ready for 15-minute cities, but at the same time, in the partnership, we do address and try and handle a lot of dilemmas that comes with this work. What kind of dilemmas are this, and are they in the way of the 15-minute cities?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, also a warm welcome from my side. Thank you for being here with us today and sharing. Very much looking forward to learning from this hour of reflections. Yeah, coordinating the 50-minute city transition pathway in DUT is kind of a tough thing, because the 50-minute city concept is not a really formalized concept, so to say, yet, at least. It's not a real set in stone planning instrument. It's more kind of, for now, a narrative, I think a very attractive narrative for a collection of concepts that hopefully help us sharpen our senses towards important issues in cities, which, for example, are focusing on accessibility, on social services, and on people needs and people-based planning. But kind of from this, there also come some challenges, as you said. I would say the first one, directly connected to still being evolving narrative and not such a strict planning concept. There's a bit of the danger that kind of it is seen and used as a marketing statement without a clear pathway or follow-up, so to say. On the other hand, I think what is most prominently named as a shortcoming or as a danger or dilemma that the 50-minute city concept is settled in is the problem of green gentrification. If we make neighborhoods very attractive, if we reduce transit, invest a lot in public space, there is the danger that prices rise up if we don't have a strategic and regulatory instruments in place, and thus could lead to forcing people out of their neighborhoods if they cannot bring the income necessary for continuing living there. So I think kind of these are kind of two of many things that we could discuss further and have to discuss further in the future, where we can start off when talking about dilemmas.
Thank you. And around the lunch table, we also have Dick Ettema. You are Professor of Urban Accessibility and Social Inclusion at the Department of Human Geography and Spatial Planning at Utrecht University, my personal favorite European city. You are the director of the Urban Futures Research Program and board member of the focus area Sport and Society. And you're the coordinator of the COCOMO project, stands for Competing and Complementary Mobility Solutions in Urban Contexts. And this is one of those projects that's been awarded funding in this ENUAC call. From my understanding, COCOMO aims to provide insights into how shared micromobility, SMM, combined with existing travel modes and what this implies for sustainability, as well as equity and inclusion. So, Dick, warm welcome. You, on the other hand, told me that you sometimes question whether our current lifestyles are at all geared to fit the 50-minute city at this point. Could you explain a bit to us what you meant by that, or your take on it?
Yes, thanks for the introduction and the invitation to be here and the opportunity to discuss issues about micromobilities, 50-minute city and the like. Yes, we talked a bit about this in preparation, and a statistic that comes to mind often is that if you look at the city of Utrecht, for instance, that 45% of the trips made in Utrecht are made by bike. So that is great, and it is related to the fact that Utrecht is pretty much already a 15-minute city. If you do not live totally at the edge of the city, you can easily access many different destinations and facilities. So that's good. But if you look at the trips made in, to, and from Utrecht, and at the kilometers being driven, then bicycle amounts only for about 7% of all kilometers being driven. So the point here is that this 15-minute city of Utrecht, if I may call it like that, is part of a bigger spatial system, which is also pretty much car-oriented, because there's also origins and destinations outside the city. They could be close to other cities or at the outskirts of other cities, but still be best accessible by car. So meaning that okay, you can give access to many facilities within 15 minutes, but still with our modern lifestyles, where we find very specific jobs, where we want to consume very specific services, probably to express a very specific lifestyle, or we need to take specific medical treatment. So it's much about specialization. All these things lead us to travel outside our 15 minutes boundary. So that is a big challenge. And you could, of course, by extending the 15-minute concept more into a network conception, cover part of that. And that's also related to transit-oriented development, of course. But not for all trips. And there's also a big heritage of spatial development, not only urban development, of spatial development in lower densities. There's also still a lot of villages in more rural parts, also in the Netherlands, to which this concept does not so easily apply. So those are some things we definitely need to think about, and maybe not focus too much on city centers in developing and elaborating this concept, but thinking more about how to expand it to other types of spatial developments.
Maybe not all trips and maybe not all groups, or what you say, Alexis Conesa, you are at the table too, and you are with us from the University of Strasbourg, and you as well represent an ENUAC project, the Justice project. Justice combines accessibility modeling with qualitative approaches to consider inequalities in an inclusive city strategy. And you focus on 4 specific audiences suffering from accessibility gaps: disabled, blind and visually impaired, elderly and socially underprivileged people. What do you say, Alexis, when it comes to 15-minute cities and this type of work that you're doing? Is it a solution for all groups involved, or how would you think about it?
Well, first of all, thank you, Caroline, and thank you all. And thank you for having me there and sharing my thoughts about the 15-minute city. Well, from my part, I guess 15-minute cities is way more difficult to achieve in other cities than in the Netherlands, where bike and transit-oriented planning are well developed. But in France, even in most of French specialists think that Strasbourg is the bike-oriented city in France, but comparing to the other European cities, it's in fact not so bike-oriented. But to be back to our subject, yeah, I think 15-minute cities, as it has been said before by the 2 other panelists, it can cause inequalities because of the land prices increase, of course, because attractive neighborhoods are going to be gentrified, of course, but beyond these economical aspects, we also have to be aware that some segments, some specific population and users are not fully included in most of the strategy that our cities aim to develop. So you have quoted all the 4 specific population and specific users we target in the Justice project, but the real reflection that drives us to this project is that 15-minute cities or transit-oriented development needs accessibility, multi-scale accessibility, good transit system, and also good walkability and bikeability to access this transport. And there are inequalities, but if in addition of this, you consider the population that can't access because of physical or sometimes cognitive barriers, so the inequalities are even larger and larger to a point that maybe this population can't feel involved into our maybe very sustainable strategies. So that's one of the question we wanted to address.
Yeah, and I think I encourage everyone to follow the progress. You're about halfway now in the project, and you are to develop this inclusive city strategy. I think many will want to look at how you contributed to that. So I suggest you all keep following how that goes. And speaking of the 15-minute city concept and how it can be seen or within different groups, our fourth guest today, you wrote a book that was actually able to dissect this topic from several different perspectives. Natalie Whittle, you are a writer and an editor based in Glasgow and author of the book The 15-Minute City, Global Change Through Local Living. And you worked for 15 years at the Financial Times in London. Natalie, how was this book received, and was it easy to or not argue both sides of the 15-minute city hype and concept?
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here today. As others have said, it's really interesting to bring perspectives from different parts of this conversation. So I came to the subject of the 15-minute city through my own sort of curiosity, really. I was experiencing the sort of downsides of lockdown and the 15-minute city infrastructural sort of opportunity that people were really seizing in places like Paris, suddenly sort of adding cycling lanes and actually just sort of these kind of growth spurts in what could be achieved through urban planning at a moment's notice really interested me, because whilst I could see the benefit of that, I became aware of how lockdown was also sort of simulating an enclosed or limited environment, which I think when I started to actually then write an article about it and then subsequently a book, I realized, as Maxi has already pointed out, that actually it's very misleading to think of this concept as one with defined limits, that we must try, and that the effort is towards a specific radius in the city, and that the effort should be only towards neighborhoods. And actually, you know, it's a very good description to call it a narrative rather than you know, a defined idea. And again, you know, what Dick was saying about including the rural setting is really important, I think, in part of sort of creating a balanced perspective of this problem. And yeah, I mean, there are lots of, as we know, there are lots of vocal criticisms at the moment in media of the 15-minute city that have particularly sort of hooked themselves to a misinterpretation, I think, of what the 15-minute city is trying to achieve. It's not a kind of, it's not a plan to restrict freedom of movement, but nonetheless, I think it does require some redrawing of a city that's just inevitable. You know, something has to be sacrificed. We see that in Paris and in other places. You know, if you want to create more cycle lanes, you want to create more cycling, bicycle storage, you have to get rid of parking spaces, and you have to do it comprehensively and boldly. And I think taking all of these things into perspective, and particularly the way that the 15-minute city is a partnership between private and public sectors and interests, is really very complex. And I think the more that we can just sort of acknowledge the complexity, the better it is for the public, the conversation with, you know, particularly with public consultations. Yeah.
Thank you. Maxi, you're nodding here when Natalie speaks. Have you also encountered these critical voices and maybe scared voices around the 15-minute cities ideas? Yeah,
well, how can I say it? I feel that it's not only it is a lot of criticism. It is a lot of fears that kind of go with along this narrative that proposes quite big changes. But it is also some part of culture war, I feel. And this is a concept that, for me, my interpretation and how I understand it, comes is a bit stronger already in the US and in Britain. And it's coming slowly also towards continental Europe, so to say, but it hasn't arrived there yet. So I'm very happy that we still have kind of this time to prepare ourselves for widely also kind of misunderstood and also misarranged arguments, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of misinformation going on besides all the real and understandable fears that come along with these changes too. But one quickly thought that I wanted to share was that kind of the main thing that proposes the 15-minute city is focus on neighborhoods where people can walk or cycle to fulfill the basic and daily needs. I think like specialized needs will definitely need to be centralized, and so much more. But kind of it is this promise of if you want to have bread, then walk to your bakery. And that's something that happens in inner cities, but in many European cities and also kind of outskirts, it doesn't happen like this. And I think what it really comes along with is to step away from a car-oriented development, because we're currently having a dominant form of movement also in cities that is very inefficient. And they don't only talk about fuels and about transporting 80 kilos of humans with two-ton cars. And I don't even start talking about e-fuels, because this can get me very excited. But also kind of it's very inefficiently when we talk about use of space. And I think that's kind of the key resource and the key thing that we should focus on in cities. So this was kind of a bit of what I want to react. And I very much also agree with Natalie that it's a very complex endeavor, and it needs to be addressed, crossing sectors, which will be quite hard, but I think also very rewarding.
Uh-oh, we mentioned the car, so might as well continue, because before we glance to the future, we wanted to just have a look at the past, maybe also the present. And Natalie, you built your book around consideration of space and time. You collected some models from, you know, ancient Athens to modern Paris. A lot has happened in terms of mobility and space, obviously. Did you come across matters from the past that you think we should learn from and pick up again? I mean, in a way, the 15-minute city, it's an old idea. It's kind of a village radius, right? But what do you think we can learn looking at history?
Well, to take an example from recent history, I think this would be familiar to certainly people joining from Scandinavia, but and Central Europe. But it was new information to me that actually kind of, you think of Holland and Denmark as these kind of cycling utopias, and I had not really stopped to think why that would be. You know, I think I just took it for granted that it was, you know, topographical kind of consequence of this flat terrain. Not many people cycle in Glasgow here because there are terrible potholes from the rain, and there are hills left, right and centre. But I think, you know, when I looked closer at it, I was actually interested to learn that it was actually a kind of product of activism during a period of post-war expansion of motorways and infrastructure for the car, because that was the kind of economic opportunity at the time. And then there was a backlash after there were a lot of fatalities, particularly amongst children in road crashes, and combined with the kind of the squeeze on the consumer at the petrol pump during a fuel shortage, that I think this kind of created in the 60s in Holland a kind of a mass protest that really sort of created a before and after, from what I understand, in the kind of transportation culture. That I think for me that sort of created a really an important thing to kind of reflect on, how actually when people really want something, that's when the most comprehensive change comes through. And I think maybe in terms of where we are now, we might, so as you asked about history, but I also think that, you know, we could be thinking about what the children at the moment in school are going to be thinking about, how they get around the city, how will they want their cities to evolve, what kind of activism will they be part of, what could they bring to this conversation. So there is that. And then, you know, and you mentioned Athens. I looked at, I guess, because I was thinking about, 15 minutes, why are we measuring it in this way? It was partly, that's where our kind of tolerance for sort of walking seems to end. We don't really want to go further than a mile to go to the bakery. And I was looking at that concept of how time has been imposed as we have evolved as societies, and how actually sort of in Athens distance was really measured not as a sort of a temporal thing, but you measure distance between tasks and between duties as a citizen. So you walk to the agora where you're going to sort of hear public debates. And again, I suppose that's sort of another thing that I've been interested in this debate, is the sort of question of destinations and improving destinations, not just kind of improving accessibility.
And you mentioned the agora. I encourage everyone to search for the agora on the Urban Europe website. You'll be positively surprised what to find there. Dick, you spoke earlier about whether or not we're geared towards the 15-minute city. Was there a time in the past when we were better equipped or suitable for this lifestyle? Or what is your take on inclusive, sustainable mobility, looking at historic times, or somewhat historic?
Somewhat historic. Yeah, I think Natalie referred to the Dutch history. I think to explain the high cycling rate in the Netherlands traditionally also has to do with our sort of restrictive planning system. So it has never been the case that urban development, or suburban development for that matter, could take place wherever developers wanted. But this was all very neatly planned. So there is we had planning memorandums since the Second World War. I'm trying not to give a lecture here, but one was specifically called a concept of bundled deconcentration. So yes, it was recognized that cities were growing, people had to move out, but then not do it in a scattered way, but collect this suburbanization in certain satellite cities, so to speak, such as to still have enough demand for public transport and also keep that in place, and also allow for, and it's also because the Netherlands is a small country, the distances between cities and satellite cities were not so big, so you could still cycle. So providing cycling infrastructure also between cities and between towns has been done also since the 70s and 80s. So I think that sort of kept cycling at a high level before massive motorization. There was a lot of cycling going on, of course, because it's small, it's flat here. So that was maintained. And I think since the turn of the century or so, like in all places, cycling boomed again in the Netherlands due to further improved infrastructure, adopting healthier lifestyles, introduction of e-bike, etc., etc. I don't know if that's the answer to your question.
Sure, yes.
I forgot your question a little bit. But
oh, of course. But I do think that let's have a look. Let's look at the future then. So we've had a bit of reflection about the past, and I do have a bunch of quotes here about what is needed for urban transformation to inclusive mobility. These are your quotes, and I thought I'd just read them out randomly, and if you recognize that this is your quote, then confess and elaborate. We will then have some questions from the chat, so please feel free to post your ideas, reflections, or questions in the chat now. Okay, first quote. It goes like this: cities need to enhance a balanced combination of attractive walkable areas, effective transit, and a car-restrictive urban planning. This is only possible if the entire society feels involved in the transition, thanks to participation, adaptive communication, and inclusive planning. A fully sustainable development implies genuine accessibility for all, fairness, and justice. Who said this?
Okay, so I must confess. that's my quote. Yeah, well, what I wanted to point out is and it's related to today's story, you know, the car oriented planning, for example, in France, has led to what we have called a few years ago the yellow jackets crisis. You know, it was that peri-urban middle class or low class people that were against the carbon taxes, and that's because they are car dependent, and because of their accessibility in public transport, or let alone the bike and the walking, is very poor. So I guess the inequalities lead to criticism and to a bad understanding of sometimes restrictive and coercive policies to get us to sustainable cities, and 15-minute city is a good example of this. So my thought was that we need to involve people into planning, and to involve people, we need maybe to have less accessibility inequalities, and also involve them in the decision-making process. So participation and all these very trendy tools, but I don't think we really we know what to do now to really involve the population and make them feel that the collective goal is also interesting. Yeah. So
yeah, thank you. And the next quote is somewhat along the similar lines. It goes like this: inclusivity in the cities of the future needs to be intersectional. We can't think of leveling up access to sidewalks, active travel, and greener transportation without also thinking of improving the destinations to which people are headed and improving the quality of life to which they return at home.
Yes, that was great. I mean, I really agree with what Alexis was saying. in terms of public consultation, and I think this will be a big part of getting things right. I would also sort of sound a note of skepticism about how public consultations are carried out, because I think in my experience, it's sort of quite a self-selecting group who tend to sort of come forward when these questions about what a city should look like or what it should change into are put forward. So I think a sort of a very proactive approach would be important. I mean, I think that the thing that I described is ambitious and utopian, and it simply isn't possible in society to achieve a kind of parity of income. So, perhaps we shouldn't strive for the impossible, but I think just sort of maybe setting ambitious targets leads to better results. Maybe as a philosophy, I'm not sure.
Thank you. And ambitious targets have definitely been set in the DUT partnership. I might have spoiled who the next quote is from now, but it goes like this: we can only get to a sustainable and inclusive urban mobility if our policies manage to combine sectors and bring people on board. Cities have always shaped societal perceptions and trends, and are apt test beds to shape new sustainable forms of moving and living and overcome social polarization.
Yeah, that was me. I think I tried to mention maybe too many things in there, but I basically want to underline two elements that I see essential when thinking about the future of cities. Something that I've said before already, and I think was also mentioned by the other participants of the discussion, is the importance to combine sectors. It will not be enough if we focus on technical innovations and solutions. Let's say something kind of, for example, last mile deliveries cities. If we don't think about the regulatory environment, if we don't think about how it is embedded in public space and how and where could it be located, where it makes most sense for people and for society. So I think really such a very simple example of the importance of crossing sectors is what I would like to highlight in there. And I think the 50-minute city concept, and it doesn't have to be 50, it can be 10 in the case of Utrecht, it can be 30 maybe in the case of cities like Bogota and Istanbul, depending on kind of what you can actually, where do you see most improvements, I would say. And the second thing is what I wanted to raise in there is the importance of bringing people on board, very much underlined, and going along with what Alexis and Natalie said. I think this is essential while also very hard and burdensome and exhausting also for city administration. But it is super important because we have cities where the political will is there, for example, France or Paris as a city in France, where you see that what can be done in which has never, or I personally have never seen before, kind of the urban transformations happening there, without saying everything is great there. But the scope and the speed of what is going on is incredible. But if this political will lacks, it's really, really hard. Kind of we know so much already in mobility and urban planning what should be done, but we don't manage to bring it on the streets and squares. So that's why I really think kind of this public acceptance, this involvement of people, involvement in creating narratives together, in participatory budgeting will be something we need to explore much further. And that's why I wanted to stress this second point of the people.
Yeah, and at the same time, it seems to require ethical trade-offs. So what do you say, Dick? Because your quote was, fairness and sustainability of daily mobility are not easy to reconcile and require ethical trade-offs.
Yeah, that was my quote indeed. So, and this comes a bit from the ambivalent view I have on car traffic. So the narrative in transportation and transportation policy is, at least in urban transport, that it's something bad, it's polluting, it's not healthy, it takes space away from pedestrians or cyclists or playing children, and of course that's all true, but it's also an invention that facilitates freedom of movement for many people, and it has helped people a lot in doing the things they want to do, and we should not forget that. So if we want to become truly sustainable and depart from the idea that we cannot innovate ourselves out of the negative ecological consequences, so electrification will not do the complete trick, then it means that we have to restrict car traffic, but that will never be painless, how well we plan our cities at all. So we have to make choices, and there are underlying values for these choices. And one is individual freedom and freedom of movement. Another is the value of the ecology, of nature, of biodiversity, but also values about how costs and benefits should be distributed in a fair way, and what is fair mobility in that sense. And I think that discussion has not often been held, to be honest. So there are a lot of underlying tacit assumptions why we should do certain things, but it is about underlying values, and that means also that this is not the domain for transportation planners only or technicians only, but it should be a public debate. So that's where I agree with the three other panelists that we should have a public discussion about what are the values. So if we say, okay, altogether we find personal freedom much more important than the ecology, okay, I hope not, but then we should just keep driving as we do. But if we say it's otherwise, then we also need to acknowledge that, and I think also address this fairness question, because otherwise the yellow vests are a typical example of what happens if you just ignore that and put it in as a technocratic measure of, okay, this needs to be done. But that's a very difficult discussion, but it's coming increasingly urgent, I think, to have that discussion.
Indeed so. Katarina, before I forget, we have to do, what is going on in the chat? I haven't been able to check.
Well, quite a lot, actually. It seems like not everyone is out walking, but rather sitting here and also by the computer and filing some, showing their interest in questions. And I see that we also have people who offer solutions and ask to get on board. So I see these functions a little bit like supporting networking and a meeting place. That's good. But I would want to raise one question here that is a little bit about learning from the past. So it's a question here. I am wondering if Louvain-la-Neuve, Belgium, that has been designed as a 15-minute city and built as a new city from the 70s onward, is used as a case study in the new 15-city trend, both in terms of good and bad practices. Do we learn from, this is not the first time we plan 15-minute cities. Do we learn from past experiences?
Wow, I did an exchange semester in Louvain-la-Neuve. That was nostalgic. Anyone has a comment on that from the guests? Yeah, Maxi.
Yeah, maybe not the complete answer, but maybe kind of a start of the discussion. So I think learning from the past is so essential, and my perception of human history is that kind of we have, what we don't manage is that we don't manage to hand over the information from one generation to the next properly, and we also always invent other narratives that sell better, that propose more interesting values at the moment, and then have the tendency to forget, kind of to say, oh, this is something completely new. But the 50-minute city is combining so many elements of past concepts of like research on proximity of mobility is so it's 50 years old. The city of short distances, or focusing on central social function, this is research from the 50s basically. So definitely very much the importance of learning from history, from taking up these learnings. Very essential. I don't know so much about Leuven, to be honest. I could not go into this case study, but just kind of to kick off the round of answers.
Well, I think we're starting to see a pattern here of both dilemmas and ways forward. And dare I say, with or without the 15-minute city, but it is time for what has become a classic urban Landstock feature, namely the do's and don'ts. And what are some do's and don'ts when it comes to realizing inclusive mobility? All listeners, you are very welcome to share your do or don't in this regard in the chat. Let's start with you, Natalie. Do you have a do or don't when it comes to this topic? Is the answer as short as 15-minute city is a do?
Well, with regard to some of the pilot studies that are going on in particularly in smaller cities and towns and in more remote parts of Scotland, I think their focus is very much on small details. So to think of the 15-minute city in a completely different way. So, you know, there's one that is looking at the quality of bus stops and the tarmacking around the town centre, so that people actually want to go and walk to get their groceries rather than drive. So I think that's so. Do think of the 15-minute city as a concept that will look different in every place in which it's practiced. And don't be surprised, I suppose, if there are failures along the way. I mean, I think in terms of history, you see that with what happened in Glasgow with the dispersal, when they decided to sort of create more of a motorised city, best connected to Edinburgh, and displace people to places like Cumbernauld, which was in itself a kind of like a proto 15-minute city, and now that's come full circle. They've decided to demolish that town centre and start again. So I think we will see some things just won't work, but that's maybe not it's just perhaps inevitable in a way.
Dick or Alexis or Maxi, do you have a different do or don't than Natalie that you would like to share? Dick, maybe?
Yeah, I think do is basically do everything that we know already that helps to make cities and destinations accessible by active modes. And there's so much out there already, including the 15-minute concept, which also includes many of these ideas in itself, I think. Do it consistently and long term, and also think about the network aspect of that. So not only the city, but the regional aspect. And don't forget that it may not work for everyone, and that maybe in different ways. So there was a new urban neighborhood designed in Utrecht. It still has to be built, but it had many advanced things taken together, like no cars in the neighborhood, park it at the edge of the neighborhood, etc. But then it also raises questions like, okay, if you have to rent that parking spot for 200 euros, will it not be negative for inclusivity? Does this also work for 70-year-olds or 80-year-olds who cannot walk so easily anymore, etc., etc.? So I think it's important to keep those kind of things also in mind, meaning that you may also need some variety of type of neighborhoods to cater for different needs.
Alexis, do you have a similar or different do or don't in this regard?
Yes, it was very similar on the substance of it. My do was do consider the most marginalized in every urban operation. So that's very similar to what Dick just said. It doesn't mean that every urban space has to be fully inclusive or most marginalized, because it's not possible. But it means that we have to consider what will happen when the I don't know, for example, the wheelchair user, or okay, he can't access this building or this place. So okay, but what is proposed to him alternatively? So that I think always think to the most marginalized is a good way to reach inclusivity, or to increase the level of inclusivity or inclusiveness.
And also encouraged in the SDGs and so on to depart from that. Okay, I want to check, Katarina, were there any do's and don'ts in the chat as well?
Yes, there's a do I think we haven't raised yet, and it's about making the journey, the destination, how to make the journey more pleasurable. So if it's pleasant to travel slowly, more people will do so, was one recommendation here. Yes, but there's room for more recommendations from the participants.
Thank you. Maxi, do you have any different do or don't than what's been mentioned?
Yeah, maybe there I can manage to make the bridge towards our DOT funding program, because we're actually also an innovation platform, and thus not only fund research and innovation projects on topics of urban transitions, sustainability, but also work on a lot of other things more than that, on outreach, on community building, and so on. And I think kind of from there, we are currently working on the next call, which will open, we will open more information in July, but then really opens in autumn, September to November, where we will discuss many of these topics also in this call. So there will be also the chance to actually to propose ideas and propositions, build consortia. And one of these things that we want to discuss further there is something I think that was named by Dick before, about the transparency of policy, and especially also on the distribution effects of that. So I think kind of we really need to communicate what are the values of mobility policy that we're implementing. There will always be things lost. People, there will be, the public space has a use. It's not that public space isn't used right now, but if we can make it transparent and communicate openly what is the value of changing the status quo, I think this will be essential. And the second very short idea would be to underline the importance of experiments and of kind of temporary measures also in cities, because it allows people to feel and touch how changes can look like in public space. So, for example, the temporary bike lanes in many cities were somehow a game changer. Somehow have changed the perception. And there was a funny, and also quite controversial example in Vienna that was about a public pool in the middle of one of the biggest streets of the city that was open during the summer.
Not a car pool, that's an actual pool.
It was a swimming pool, yeah. So kind of create disruptions also in public space to open the idea, kind of this could be used differently. I think this is a valuable example and point.
Thank you. And yeah, you said before, Dick, that we do use all the information that's out there. There is a lot of knowledge. There is a lot of tools that we know. Do you also have a comment on what we don't know and should learn more about? We're mentioning experimenting here and learning from tests in public space.
Yeah, there's always new things to be learned, of course. You may think about mobility innovations and how they work out. So in our COCOMO project that you mentioned, it's about shared micro-mobilities. For some people, they might create an option to improve their accessibility to services, allowing them to do more. That is very tentatively what we also find. it's not that people who use micromobilities, at least in our study, say that their accessibility is better than from other people, but they say that it has been improved. So it's apparently something they use, or that some people use to catch up. Another thing is, sorry for taking the time to mentioning some things of our projects, but the diversity in micromobilities is very large. So it's shared e-bikes, shared bikes, shared mopeds, shared scooters, the public transport bike in the Netherlands, and we see, and shared cargo bikes. And we see that people use different combinations of those mobilities combined with their own private mobility options. And I think that will be very interesting to learn more about. And if it comes to the 15-minute city, e-bikes might be an important way to stretch the spatial reach of the 15-minute city and increase people's accessibility. We see that it's really taking off in the Netherlands very strongly, but also in other places. So it raises lots of questions, also related to the previous questions about how can we make the journey more pleasant. So if conventional cycling becomes too tiring, an e-bike may make it more pleasant. Or if you talk about hilly cities like Glasgow, it may make cycling more attractive. It consumes some energy, but much less than if you go by car, and can easier be produced by renewables. But that's one area I think where we can learn more.
Thank you. And we're about to wrap up here with one word each. So let's find one word that describes what you imagine in a future where mobility is sustainable and inclusive. And all of you listening, you can drop your one word in the chat too. Maybe you want to close your eyes, you picture an urban area or a city. How does it look? How does it feel? How does it sound? One word for what you're envisioning here. Post it in the chat, and I will ask our guests here for their one word. So maybe we go Natalie, Alexis, Maxi, and Dick. So Natalie, what is your one word?
Communicative or conversational. That's two words. I've cheated already, sorry.
Thank you. You pass. Alexis.
Yeah, I was thinking of integrative.
Thank you. Maxi.
I would say pleasant or attractive.
Lovely.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, so maybe I should say something else now, but let's say transparent.
Thank you. So that was about it for today. In today's Urban Lunch Talk, we've together envisioned the future of inclusive and sustainable mobility through the lens of the 15-minute city. Thank you, Maximilian Jäger. Thank you, Dick Ettema, Alexis Conesa, and Natalie Whittle for so generously contributing to this knowledge base that we all benefit from. And it's been a pleasure learning from you. I also want to thank all of you who listened today and shared your knowledge and ideas in the chat. We hope you had a nice lunch walk or a break. And if you subscribe to the JPI Urban Europe and the Driving Urban Transitions newsletters, you will receive more invitations like this for upcoming talks. Thank you, and have a good day.